every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. It is 2:18 in the afternoon on Thursday, August 28, 2003. The summer sun beats down on the asphalt of Peach Street in Erie, Pennsylvania. It's the kind of thick, humid heat that makes the air feel heavy, that slows everything down. But for the dispatchers at the Erie 911 call center, time is about to accelerate into a terrifying, incomprehensible blur. A call comes in from a teller at the PNC Bank branch just south of the city center. The voice is strained but clear. They've just been robbed. The robber wasn't aggressive, didn't shout. He was a man in his 40s, balding, wearing a t-shirt. He was carrying a strange, homemade-looking cane that was, in fact, a single-shot shotgun, and he had a bomb locked around his neck. He had handed the teller a note, not just demanding money, but explaining his situation. The note claimed he was a hostage, a pawn in a twisted game. He needed $250,000. He only got away with $8,702. Now, just minutes after that call, Pennsylvania state troopers spot the man's Geo Metro sedan in a parking lot, a short distance from the bank. His name, they will soon learn, is Brian Wells. He is 46 years old. He is a pizza delivery driver. And he is about to become the center of one of the most confounding and macabre criminal cases in American history. The officers draw their weapons, ordering him out of the car. Wells complies, his hands in the air. He gets on his knees in the middle of the pavement. He tells the officers about the device clamped tight around his neck. It's a triple-banded metal collar, a bulky, menacing contraption with wires and a locking mechanism. He tells them it's going to explode. He says he was accosted by a group of black men who forced the collar on him and made him rob the bank. He's scared. The police establish a perimeter, keeping a careful distance, their guns still trained on the kneeling man. They call for the bomb squad. Wells sits on the hot pavement, his hands cuffed behind his back. He looks at the officers ringing him. "It's gonna go off," he says, his voice rising with panic. "I'm not lying." The minutes stretch into an eternity. He asks why no one is trying to get the device off of him. The police can only wait. The bomb squad is on its way, but they are not there yet. The device around Brian Wells's neck begins to emit a series of beeps, faster and faster. He squirms on the ground. At 3:18 p.m., exactly 1 hour after the bank robbery call, the device detonates. A sharp, violent blast echoes through the suburban shopping plaza. The force of the explosion is directed upward, into his chest and neck. Brian Wells dies on the pavement, in full view of police officers and television news cameras that have arrived on the scene. He dies before the bomb squad ever gets there. In the immediate, horrific aftermath, 1,000 questions hang in the humid air. Who would do this? Who would devise such a cruel and elaborate method of extortion? But as investigators begin to comb through the evidence, including 9 pages of meticulously handwritten notes found in Wells's car, they realize the most pressing question is not just who, but what. What was the real story? Was Brian Wells the tragic, innocent victim he claimed to be, a delivery man caught in a nightmare, or was he something else entirely? A willing participant in a bizarre plot that went catastrophically, fatally wrong. This case would unearth a cast of characters so damaged and malevolent, their connections so tangled, that it would take the FBI years to unravel. It is a story of hoarding, mental illness, manipulation, and murder, all culminating in that single, fatal explosion on a summer afternoon. Today, on Anatomy of Crime, we dissect the anatomy of a bizarre conspiracy, a plot so convoluted and strange it seems torn from the pages of a macabre thriller, and, at its heart, a question that lingers to this day. The initial scene was one of chaos and bewilderment for law enforcement. A man was dead, killed by a bomb that had been locked to his body. The weapon used in the robbery, a strange-looking cane, was found to be a functioning homemade zip gun. But the most crucial evidence was inside Brian Wells's car. 9 pages of handwritten instructions, addressed to the bomb hostage. These notes were the key to everything. A chilling window into the mind or minds behind the plot. They were painstakingly detailed, almost compulsively so, filled with diagrams, maps, and a set of instructions for a high-stakes scavenger hunt. The document was titled Scavenger Hunt Instructions. It informed the reader that the device around their neck was a live bomb that could only be disarmed by following a series of timed tasks to find keys and combination codes. The timer, the notes warned, was unforgiving. Failure to complete the tasks in the allotted time would result in imminent death. The notes were written in a curious, almost formal tone, peppered with threats and warnings. There is no room for error, and there are no second chances, one section read. Act now. Think later, or you will die. The ultimate goal of this deadly game was to retrieve a final key that would free the wearer from the collar bomb. The bank robbery, it turned out, was merely the first step. The stolen money was irrelevant to the plotters. The act of robbing the bank was simply a task designed to test compliance and start the clock. The first clue on the scavenger hunt was meant to be retrieved from behind a sign near the bank. From there, Wells would have been directed to a small container in a wooded area, and then onward, in a race against time across Erie. The complexity was staggering. It suggested a planner with a meticulous, detail-oriented, and profoundly cruel imagination. Who could have written this? The handwriting was neat, the instructions precise. It spoke of careful planning, of a well-thought-out, albeit sadistic, scheme. Investigators immediately sent the notes to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit at Quantico. The profile that came back was a surprise. The experts believe the author was likely not a sophisticated criminal mastermind, but someone who was intelligent yet undisciplined. Someone with a grandiose sense of self, who saw this not just as a crime, but as a complex intellectual game of their own design. The bomb itself was another piece of the puzzle. It was a hinged, clamshell-style collar, made of cold-rolled steel. It was locked with 4 separate keyholes, and a combination lock. Inside, bomb technicians found 2 pipe bombs filled with explosive powder, wired to 2 60-minute kitchen timers, and a remote detonation circuit. While it was crudely made in some respects, it was undeniably complex, and, as proven, lethally effective. It was not the work of an amateur who had simply looked up instructions online. The creator of this device had a functional, hands-on knowledge of mechanics and explosives. This was a person who could build things. The investigation, dubbed Collar Bomb by the FBI, began by focusing on Brian Wells. They needed to know everything about him. Was he truly a random victim? Wells was 46 years old and had worked as a pizza delivery driver at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria for about a decade. By most accounts, he was a quiet, unassuming man. He had dropped out of high school but was known to be intelligent, if socially awkward. He lived a simple life. He had never been in any serious trouble with the law. He didn't appear to have any enemies who would target him in such a dramatic and cruel fashion. His family was adamant. Brian was a victim, a gentle soul who would never have been involved in a bank robbery. They portrayed him as a man who was easily led, perhaps naive, but certainly not a criminal. Yet a few troubling details began to surface. On the day of the robbery, The call for the pizza delivery that sent Brian Wells on his fatal journey was not to a regular address. It was to a television transmission tower on a remote, dead-end road. It was the perfect place for an ambush. When investigators traced the call, they found it was made from a payphone at a nearby gas station. More perplexingly, when Wells left the pizza shop, his boss noted that he didn't take his usual route. He went in a completely different direction, as if he were going to a meeting before making the delivery. Was it possible he met his co-conspirators to be fitted with what he thought was a fake bomb? The question hung over the investigation. He had told the police he was accosted by a group of black men, but no witnesses could corroborate this, and the evidence didn't point in that direction. The FBI began to suspect that this story was a fabrication, a pre-planned alibi meant to be used after the successful heist. The case remained intensely public but yielded few solid leads for weeks. The investigators were swimming in theories but lacked a single person of interest. Erie, a city of just over 100,000 people, was gripped by fear and speculation. The pizza bomber case was a national story, a bizarre footnote in the annals of crime, and then, almost a month later, on September 20, 2003, the case broke wide open in the most unexpected way imaginable. It started not with a clue from the scavenger hunt or a forensic match, but with another 911 call. This call was from a man named William Bill Rothstein. He was calling from a payphone near his home on Peach Street, just a stone's throw from the site of the original pizza delivery call. Rothstein was agitated. He told the dispatcher that there was a body in a freezer in his garage. He said the woman who put it there was named Marjorie D. Armstrong, and he was afraid she was going to kill him next. When police arrived at Rothstein's cluttered, semi-isolated home, they found him waiting. He was a 59-year-old handyman, known around town as a bit of an eccentric. He led them to the garage. Inside a large white freezer, they found the frozen body of a man. His name was James Roden. He was Marjorie D. Armstrong's live-in boyfriend. Rothstein then handed the police a typed, multi-page suicide note. In it, he confessed to a different, unrelated murder from years ago, but he denied any involvement with the body in his freezer or with the pizza bomber case, though he did mention it, writing, "This has nothing to do with the Wells case." For investigators, that unsolicited denial was a massive red flag. Why mention the Wells case at all? Bill Rothstein was a complicated figure. He had been a brilliant student in his youth, a member of the General Electric College Bowl team, but his life had taken a different path. He was now a reclusive handyman who lived in a house filled with junk, a hoarder's paradise. He had been engaged to Marjorie D. Armstrong years earlier. Their relationship was tumultuous, and though they were no longer a couple, they remained deeply and dangerously enmeshed in each other's lives. Rothstein told police that Marjorie had shot James Roden during an argument over money. He claimed he had only helped her move the body and hide the gun, doing so out of a mixture of fear and a lingering sense of loyalty to her. Suddenly, investigators had two new names, Bill Rothstein and Marjorie D. Armstrong. And with Marjorie, they had stumbled upon the dark, manipulative heart of the entire conspiracy. Marjorie was 54 years old, but her life story was a tragic saga of brilliance undone by profound mental illness. In her youth, she was at the top of her class, a beautiful and popular student who went on to earn a master's degree in education. She was once seen as a pillar of her community, but she suffered from severe bipolar disorder, complicated by paranoia and narcissistic personality traits. Over the decades, her mental health had deteriorated catastrophically. she became a compulsive hoarder, her home filled with so much garbage and debris that it was nearly uninhabitable. Marjorie also had a disturbing history with the men in her life. Her trail of past lovers was littered with suspicious deaths. In 1984, her boyfriend Robert Thomas was found dead in their home with a gunshot wound to the chest. She claimed she shot him in self-defense, and she was acquitted. Years later, her husband, Richard Armstrong, died from a cerebral hemorrhage, which was ruled accidental, though many who knew him had their doubts. Now, James Roden was dead, frozen in her ex-fiancé's garage. To the investigators, Marjorie Deal Armstrong was beginning to look less like a victim of circumstance and more like a black widow. As they dug into her life, they found a powerful motive connecting her to the pizza bomber plot. Marjorie's father was a relatively wealthy man, but he was frugal and had largely cut her off financially due to her erratic behavior. Marjorie was convinced she was owed a massive inheritance, and she was growing impatient. Investigators uncovered a stunning theory. Marjorie needed money, a large sum of it, to hire a hitman to murder her father so she could get her hands on the inheritance. The bank robbery, with its target of $250,000, was not a random number. It was the exact amount a local criminal named Kenneth Barnes had quoted her for the job. The connections were beginning to form a chilling, cohesive picture. Bill Rothstein, the handyman who could build anything, was the likely architect of the collar bomb. Marjorie Deal Armstrong was the volatile, intelligent, and manipulative mastermind, and James Roden, the man in the freezer, was a problem that had to be eliminated. The theory was that Roden had learned about the bank robbery plot and had threatened to go to the police. So Marjorie killed him. Bill Rothstein, terrified that Marjorie's violent paranoia would eventually turn on him, decided his only way out was to call the police and turn her in, hoping his cooperation and his staged suicide note would shield him from prosecution for his own involvement. With Rothstein's confession about the body, Marjorie was arrested for the murder of James Roden. While in custody, her behavior was erratic and combative. She spoke in circles, veering between moments of lucid intelligence and paranoid diatribes. She denied everything, of course. She claimed Rothstein was the real killer, that he was obsessed with her and was trying to frame her. She painted herself as the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by the very men she was now accused of harming. But the web was tightening. Investigators turned their attention to the final piece of the puzzle. Kenneth Barnes. Barnes was a retired television repairman who supplemented his income by dealing crack cocaine. He was also a fishing buddy of Marjorie's. He was known in Erie's criminal underworld as someone who could get things done. When the FBI approached him, he was already in jail on unrelated drug charges, facing a long sentence, and with the promise of some leniency, Barnes decided to talk, and his confession would provide the narrative that the prosecution had been looking for. Barnes laid out the entire plot. He confirmed that Marjorie had approached him to kill her father for the inheritance. He said the $250,000 figure was indeed his price. The bank robbery was her idea, a way to get the money to pay him. Barnes admitted he was a part of the planning. He said the core group of conspirators consisted of himself, Marjorie Deal Armstrong, Bill Rothstein, and, crucially, Brian Wells. According to Barnes, Brian Wells was not an innocent victim. He was a willing participant from the beginning. This was the bombshell the FBI had been waiting for, but it was also the most controversial aspect of the entire case. Barnes claimed that Wells had been involved in planning the heist for weeks. He said that Wells was known to be desperate for money to pay off a drug debt. The plan, as it was sold to Wells, was that the bomb would be a dummy. He would rob the bank, follow the scavenger hunt to a predetermined location, get the fake bomb removed, and collect his share of the money. He would then have a perfect alibi. He could claim he was a hostage, and no one would be the wiser. The story he told the police about being accosted by a group of black men was, according to Barnes, the cover story they had all agreed upon. But somewhere along the way, the plan changed. Marjorie and Rothstein, the more ruthless and controlling members of the group, decided they couldn't trust Wells. They worried he might back out or go to the police. So they double-crossed him. When Wells showed up for the rendezvous at the transmission tower, expecting to be fitted with a fake bomb, Bill Rothstein clamped a very real, very live bomb around his neck. The scavenger hunt was a ruse, a cruel bit of theater. The notes were designed to be impossible to complete in the given time. There was no key. There was no escape. Brian Wells was never meant to survive the day. He had been transformed from a co-conspirator into a walking, talking human time bomb, a disposable tool in their larger, more sinister plan. Barnes's confession painted a horrifying picture of betrayal and cold-blooded calculation. It explained so many of the lingering questions. It explained why Wells took a different route from the pizza shop. He was going to meet them. It explained why his story to the police seemed so thin. It was a prescripted lie. And it explained the scavenger hunt's impossible complexity. It was never meant to be solved. This version of events became the FBI's official theory of the crime. In 2005, 2 years after the bombing, they publicly named Brian Wells as a co-conspirator in his own murder. The declaration was met with outrage from the Wells family. They refused to believe it. They insisted Brian was a victim, pure and simple. They pointed to the sheer terror in his eyes during his final moments. Could a man who was in on the plot act that convincingly? They argued that he was coerced, that he was too timid to have ever agreed to such a dangerous scheme. They suggested that Kenneth Barnes, a career criminal, was simply telling the FBI what they wanted to hear in order to get a better deal for himself. The debate over Brian Wells's true role, victim or perpetrator, became the central, haunting question of the case, a source of bitter division that persists to this day. While this debate raged, the wheels of justice began to turn for the other conspirators. But even here, there were complications. Bill Rothstein, the man who built the bomb and broke the case open with his 911 call, would never face a jury. In July of 2004, less than a year after the bombing, he died of lymphoma. He went to his grave with many of his secrets, leaving behind a house full of junk, and a legacy of unanswered questions about the true extent of his role and his motivations. Was his 911 call an act of conscience, or a cold, calculated move to save himself by sacrificing Marjorie? We will likely never know for sure. This left Marjorie D. Armstrong and Kenneth Barnes as the main targets of the federal indictment, which was handed down in 2007. They were charged with conspiracy, bank robbery, and use of a destructive device in a crime of violence. The legal proceedings involving Marjorie were a spectacle in themselves. Her mental state was a constant issue. She was initially found incompetent to stand trial and was sent to a federal medical center for psychiatric treatment. When she was eventually deemed competent, her courtroom behavior was as volatile and unpredictable as her life had been. She fired her lawyers, chose to represent herself for a time, filed a flurry of bizarre motions, and delivered rambling, paranoid speeches to the court. She insisted that she was the brilliant mastermind, but of a plan to expose the real criminals. not to commit a crime herself. She claimed Rothstein was the evil genius behind it all, and that Barnes and Wells were his willing accomplices. In her telling, she was the one who had been manipulated, framed by a cabal of men who were either obsessed with her or terrified of her. Her defense was a tangled mess of conspiracy theories, grandiosity, and outright denial, a direct reflection of her own fractured mind. Kenneth Barnes, true to his word, pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against Marjorie. In court, he calmly and methodically laid out the prosecution's version of the story. He detailed the meetings, the planning sessions, the motive of killing her father, and the cold-blooded decision to use a real bomb on Brian Wells. His testimony was the linchpin of the government's case. He was a flawed witness, a career criminal testifying for a reduced sentence, but his story was detailed, consistent, and it fit the bizarre collection of facts better than any other explanation. The prosecution also presented the physical evidence. They linked materials found in Bill Rothstein's home to the construction of the bomb collar. They presented the labyrinthine notes as evidence of a grandiose and controlling personality, pointing the finger squarely at Marjorie. They argued that the entire bizarre scheme was born from her unique combination of high intelligence and severe mental illness, a potent and dangerous cocktail that, when mixed with the greed and desperation of her accomplices, proved lethal. In 2010, after a lengthy and often chaotic trial, the jury found Marjorie D. Larmstrong guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to life in prison, plus 30 years, ensuring she would die behind bars. At her sentencing, she remained defiant, continuing to proclaim her innocence and spout conspiracy theories. Kenneth Barnes received a sentence of 45 years, later reduced to 20 for his cooperation. He too would likely spend the rest of his life in prison. The legal chapter of the pizza bomber case was closed. The plotters were behind bars or in the grave. The FBI had its official narrative, but the story never felt truly finished. Too many questions were buried with Bill Rothstein. Too many truths were obscured by Marjorie D. Larmstrong's impenetrable wall of mental illness and narcissism, and the central figure, Brian Wells, remained a ghost at the center of the narrative, his true role forever debated. Was he a hapless victim, as his family tearfully insists? A man in the wrong place at the wrong time, whose final hour was a descent into unimaginable terror? Or was he a small-time crook who got in way over his head with people far more dangerous and ruthless than he could have ever imagined? A man who made a fatal miscalculation, believing he was part of a clever game, only to discover in his final, horrific moments that he was the disposable pawn. The evidence for his complicity is compelling, but not conclusive. The testimony of a career criminal is a shaky foundation on which to build a man's entire legacy. But the alternative, that this was a completely random act of violence against a stranger, seems even less plausible, given the intricate web of relationships that was later uncovered. The truth is likely somewhere in the murky middle ground. Perhaps Wells was a reluctant participant, lured in by the promise of easy money and manipulated by the stronger personalities of Marjorie and Rothstein. Perhaps he was only told a fraction of the plan, his role intentionally minimized to ensure his compliance. The conspiracy was a series of concentric circles of knowledge and trust, and Brian Wells was on the outermost ring, the most expendable and the least informed. He may have walked into the bank that day, thinking he was an actor in a play, only to realize too late that the gun was loaded and the bomb was real. The convictions of Marjorie D. Armstrong and Kenneth Barnes brought a form of resolution to the case, but not clarity. Justice was served, but the full truth remained elusive. In 2017, Marjorie died in prison from cancer at the age of 68. She took her secrets, her delusions, and her version of the truth with her. Kenneth Barnes died in prison in 2019. With their deaths, the last of the primary conspirators were gone, leaving behind a legacy of one of the strangest and most unsettling crimes in American history. A crime that began with a pizza delivery and ended in a public execution, all orchestrated from the shadows by a small group of deeply disturbed people, living quiet lives of desperation on the forgotten fringes of a small American city. The case of the pizza bomber is ultimately a study in human pathology. It's a story about what happens when greed, manipulation, and profound mental illness converge. The anatomy of this crime is not found in a single piece of evidence or a single motive. It is found in the twisted, symbiotic relationships between the conspirators. It's in the dynamic between Marjorie, the brilliant but paranoid manipulator, and Rothstein, the reclusive but capable enabler, who was both her confidant and ultimately her downfall. It's in their shared world of hoarding and secrets, a physical manifestation of the cluttered and dangerous landscape of their minds. The scavenger hunt notes, in retrospect, are the key to understanding the plot's central author. They were not just a set of instructions. They were a performance. They were an expression of a grandiose intellect, a way for the author to prove how much smarter they were than everyone else. The victim, the police, the world. The bizarre complexity, the taunts, the threats. It was all part of a dark fantasy, a real-life game of chess where the pieces were human lives. The plot was not just about money to kill a father. It was about power. It was an exercise in absolute control, masterminded by someone who felt they had lost all control over their own life. Brian Wells remains the case's most tragic figure, regardless of his level of involvement. If he was a complete innocent, his fate is a chilling testament to the random cruelty of which humans are capable. But if he was a minor co-conspirator, a man who made a desperate and foolish choice, his story is a different kind of tragedy. It is a cautionary tale about the people we choose to trust and the dark currents that can pull a person under before they ever realize the danger. His final, panicked pleas on that hot pavement were not the words of a hardened criminal. They were the words of a man who understood, in that moment, that the game was over, that he had been betrayed, and that his life was about to end in the most horrific way imaginable. The legacy of the pizza bomber case is its sheer, baffling strangeness. It resists easy categorization. It was a bank robbery, an extortion plot, a murder, and a conspiracy all rolled into one. It stands as a stark reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not mythical figures, but the damaged human beings who live down the street, their quiet desperation and twisted fantasies hidden behind closed doors and mountains of hoarded junk. In the end, the collar bomb was more than just a complex mechanism of metal and wires. It was a lockbox of secrets, and even today, with the conspirators gone, we are still left searching for the final key. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.